They said the room went quiet before she even opened her mouth. A rare silence fell across the committee chamber, not because people weren't ready to argue, but because something about her presence demanded attention. Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett adjusted the microphone, straightened her notes, and looked directly across the panel to where Chief Justice John Roberts sat. The cameras were rolling, the stakes were high. And what followed would be replayed in political science classes and late-night news panels for years to come. She didn't shout. She didn't need to. Her words had the weight of generations behind them, the urgency of a legal mind sharpened by struggle, the fire of a black woman who had fought her way through courtrooms and legislative halls, and the clarity of someone who had simply had enough. "Chief Justice Roberts," she began, her tone calm but unmistakably firm, "your legacy is not written in your dissents or your robes or the marble halls of the Supreme Court. It's written in the lives affected by your decisions, in the ballots that go uncast, in the rights rolled back, and in the silence you've allowed echo louder than the cries for justice." There was a stir, murmurs from aides, the rustle of notepads. Roberts shifted, composed but cautious. She continued, "Let me remind you of something you once said. The way to stop discrimination on the basis of race is to stop discriminating on the basis of race. That sounds clever, doesn't it? Almost poetic. But in practice, it has been used as a sword against the very protections meant to ensure equality. You have presided over decisions that gutted the Voting Rights Act, decisions that turned a blind eye to racial gerrymandering, that allowed states to chip away at the foundation of democracy with surgical precision. And you did it in the name of neutrality." She paused, letting the weight of the moment linger in the air. "I'm a former public defender, Chief Justice. I've stood beside men and women whose voices had been silenced long before they ever entered a courtroom. I've seen how the system treats the vulnerable, how it twists the language of fairness to uphold structures of inequality. So when you call your court apolitical, I must ask, whose politics are you ignoring?" A flicker of discomfort crossed Roberts' face. The other members of the committee watched, some surprised, some pleased, some fuming behind practiced stoicism. But Jasmine Crockett didn't flinch. "Every time your court decides that billionaires have the same political rights as working people because money equals speech, that's politics. Every time your court rules that a state can suppress votes under the guise of election integrity, that's politics. And every time you allow the shadow docket to rewrite the rules of justice without full argument or transparency, you make a mockery of the very Constitution you claim to defend." She leaned forward slightly. "You may wear the robe, but you are not above critique, and you are certainly not above the truth." There was no grandstanding in her voice, just conviction, the kind that turns speeches into seismic events. "We live in a country where the Supreme Court has the power to determine the trajectory of civil rights, bodily autonomy, labor protections, and environmental survival. And yet the public sees a court that shields its justices from basic ethical scrutiny, that refuses to adopt a binding code of conduct that allows relationships with billionaires and benefactors to go unexplained while the rest of us are held to account. Tell me, who exactly do you serve?" Now the silence was different. It wasn't respectful anymore. It was stunned. "You want to talk about legitimacy? Legitimacy is earned. It is not inherited through robes or traditions or lifetime appointments. It comes from a people who believe that their voices matter, and when your decisions silence those voices, when they erode the hard-won rights that came from marches, blood, court battles, and congressional action, then legitimacy becomes a ghost." She turned her attention briefly to the room at large, then back to the Chief Justice. "This isn't about left or right. It's about power. And when power hides behind doctrine, when it dresses itself in neutrality while enabling oppression, then it becomes cowardice." The Chief Justice tried to interject, but she raised her hand gently, not in disrespect, but in assertion. "I'm not finished," and nobody stopped her. "I come from a state where voter suppression isn't theory, it's practice, where access to reproductive health care is being erased, where textbooks are rewritten to erase history, and where the courts are used not to protect people but to punish them. So when your court aligns with these forces, When it abandons the people for the powerful, it doesn't just rule from above. It rules against us. She let the last words hang like a challenge. Then she closed her folder, not with flourish, but with finality. History will not be kind to silence, nor will it be kind to those who enabled injustice while calling themselves guardians of the law. She stood, and as she walked out, the silence in the room was no longer about fear or awe. It was the silence that follows truth, the kind that lingers, the kind that burns, and the kind that cannot and will not be ignored. You sat on the bench and wrote that the way to stop discrimination based on race was to stop discriminating on the basis of race, and that line may sound neat, even profound, when written in the comfort of chambers lined with law books. Centuries of precedent, but out here in the real world, where people are standing in line for hours just to cast a ballot, where polling places are being closed in black and brown neighborhoods, where voter ID laws are passed with surgical precision to exclude the poor, the elderly, and the young. That line becomes not wisdom but erasure, and we feel that erasure like a bruise that never quite heals because you didn't just weaken the Voting Rights Act, you took a scalpel to it, cutting out its heart, and you did it under the illusion that racism no longer had teeth in this country, that we had somehow become post-racial because we had elected a black president, or because a few barriers had been moved an inch. But that logic is not just naive, it is dangerous, because when you closed your eyes to the lived reality of voter suppression, you opened the floodgates to a wave of laws and schemes designed not to ensure democracy but to contain and control it, to fence it off from the people who most desperately need their voices to count. And I must ask you now, do you understand what it means when you say discrimination no longer requires oversight, when you turn away from evidence presented by decades of struggle, lawsuits, protests, and data showing disproportionate impact? Do you see the human cost of that indifference? The grandmother who's turned away because she no longer has the exact documentation her state now demands. The young man who's told his college ID isn't valid. The urban district where 10 precincts are consolidated into 2, creating lines that stretch into the night, intimidating voters, discouraging turnout, silencing civic hope, and yet your court continues to retreat from the principles that once made it a guardian of the people's rights, and when those rights are carved away, not with fanfare but with quiet, technical rulings, cloaked in language that pretends to be neutral, what we're really seeing is a shift in allegiance from the Constitution as a living document, meant to secure liberty and justice, toward a rigid, a historical tool used to reinforce the status quo. And while you may insist the court does not engage in politics, let me be clear, there is nothing more political than deciding who gets to vote and whose vote counts, and the moment the court made it easier for states with histories of racial discrimination to change voting laws without federal oversight, it ceased to be an impartial referee and became a silent partner in the suppression of democracy. And the consequences are not theoretical, they are real, they are measurable, they are strategic, and they are devastating, because voter suppression does not come marching down Main Street in white hoods anymore. It comes dressed in legislative language, in budget proposals, in last-minute rule changes, in polling location closures, in misinformation campaigns, and in legal decisions like the ones your court has made, which give a green light to those who seek to disenfranchise rather than empower. And let me tell you something. When the judiciary turns its back on disenfranchised communities under the guise of judicial restraint, it is not acting neutrally, it is choosing a side. And when history looks back on this moment, when it reviews the choices made by those entrusted with the stewardship of justice, it will not see restraint, it will see abdication, it will see a failure to rise to the moment, a failure to protect the core of what this nation claims to be about, and it will see that while brave men, women marched, bled, and died for the right to vote, the highest court in the land looked away, pretending that the march had already been completed, pretending that the work was done, and you may not feel the weight of that every time you enter the courtroom, but I promise you, millions of Americans do every time they face a new obstacle placed in their path, every time their political voice is silenced by a system that values the wealthy and well-connected over the everyday citizen, and that silence is not just a failure of policy, it is a betrayal of democracy itself, and I will Not stand quietly while you defend those decisions with lofty language about federalism or state sovereignty or deference to legislatures, because what you are really defending is a rigged game, a game in which the referees have gone home and the rules are written by those already winning, and that is not justice, that is complicity, and I say this not because I disrespect the institution of the court, but because I believe in its potential, because I believe that if the law means anything at all, it must mean that no one, not even a state legislature, not even a majority, not even a chief justice, gets to decide that some citizens count less than others, and so I ask you now, not as a colleague, not as an adversary, but as a representative of the people who feel forgotten by your rulings. Will you acknowledge the harm done? Will you recognize that democracy requires more than ceremony, more than abstract doctrine, more than polite indifference? Will you finally see what we have been trying to show you all along, that justice, real justice, does not shrink from the truth? It meets it, and it does something about it.